Hey guys, it's SD, your host of the Life Picks Relationship podcast, where people with all sorts of backgrounds, challenges, and life experience show us how they make their relationship extraordinary.
Hey guys, we're here today with Dr. Sytner, a licensed social worker, author, and marriage therapist. I'm so excited to be here and really want to hear what you have to say, especially that I know your position as a therapist and working with couples and people in general for sure had an effect on your own personal relationship. So do you want to share with us what you think makes an extraordinary relationship, both from a personal point of view and in working with other people?
I wonder how you have a lot of professionals who will often say, like, do as I say, not as I do, right? And that's sort of, I think, just an interesting arc when it comes to talking about marriage in general, is like, who has the perfect marriage? Is there such a thing as the perfect marriage, right? So many people have great marriages, but what even is the perfect marriage? What are we really looking for? And for me, the way I look at it, both certainly professionally and definitely personally, is that it's dynamic. It's an ongoing process of always trying to make it better. And I think that comes from the fact that we're all human. And I came into my marriage with my baggage. In other words, we all have our childhood issues, our emotional scars that as we're moving into adolescence and young adulthood, we're still figuring out, we're working through. And depending on the culture and the community that you come from, that could be more significant. But now suddenly I get married and I'm responsible to not only take care of my own issues, but to be understanding and accommodating of another person's. And that's so challenging because I'm just trying to figure myself out. So what my marriage looked like 20 years ago is very different than what it looked like 10 years ago, and very different than what it looks like today. And part of that is because I myself am evolving and growing, and my wife is on her own trajectory of growth and personal self-development. I think as a professional, one of the things that I'm always fascinated by is when a couple sits down in my office and I say, okay, well, what brings you here today? And they say, well, he's just not the man I once married. And she's not the woman I once married. And I smile and I say to them, okay, are either of you the same person that you were 10, 20 years ago? And they kind of look at me and wait for a moment and go, that's a good point, right? No one's supposed to be the same person when you're 30 as you were when you were 20, or when you're 50 compared to when you were 30, right? We're always changing. And so that idea of a relationship being dynamic, I think, is really important. And I'm always encouraging couples that I work with to create a space, number one, for dialogue. Let's just talk through our problems. Number two, that will lead to greater understanding, to know that we're just two different people, and that's okay. And then from there, to be able to move into a greater place of connection that's based on flexibility, of saying, this is who my wife is and this is who my husband is. So I want them to be true to who they are. I might be different. I might have a completely different perspective, right? Like I have one couple that I work with where he likes to watch sports and she loves to watch medical dramas. And they have zero interest in watching things with each other. And they're like, how are we supposed to connect at the end of the day when we sit down together and we pick up the remote and we're just not sure what to do? So that's a perfect example of, you don't have to be the same. You have to be committed to progressing through those things, growing together. And compromise, in all my experience, compromise is like the last little bit. In other words, if that couple on the couch could spend 90% of their time just talking and understanding each other's perspectives, and then the last 10%, all right, so what should we watch tonight? What should we watch tomorrow night? And too often couples go right to the compromise, right? Like, bottom line, we have to figure it out now. And I'm thinking, no, you don't have to figure it out. You have to be married. You have to be friends. You have to get along. You have to love each other, and not just love each other. There's something greater than loving each other. You know what that is? It's liking each other.
Yeah, I heard that a lot on the podcast. I want to hear your
So
perspective of it.
critical. Yeah. All of the research that I've studied from Dr. John Gottman, who spent 40 years in a laboratory setting, really studying couples, and not just studying what they say, but, and he is my mentor who and friend who trained me and who I look up to. He basically was able to code behaviors, both internal and external. So for example, most therapists and most people from a sort of a 30,000 foot view will look at a couple and say, well, what words are you using? And can you say it differently? Gottman went way, way deeper. And so in this lab setting, spent 40 years watching couples, the words they use, sure, that's very important. What about eye contact? What about body language? What about touch? What about the responses. What about physiologically? Is your heart racing? Do you have stress hormone in your urine and blood? So they actually did, they took blood and urine and these different samples to medically code what's happening if you timestamp the moment that a fight broke out. How did that correlate with the person's heart rate increasing? And then what happens in the brain? How does a person shut down, enter fight or flight mode? So we're looking at so many different characteristics of what's happening at any given moment. And that's why it's so important to be able to really be mindful and to drill down and realize people are complicated. So we could fight about an issue. And I don't mean to make this all about conflict, but we could fight about an issue. And really what's happening for me is I might just be triggered by my mother or my third grade teacher that embarrassed me, or the kid in sixth grade who bullied me, right? Or the boss that embarrassed me in front of everyone in the boardroom. I could be going through my own triggers that have nothing to do with this moment where we're fighting an issue over the remote or where to take a vacation or what color to paint the living room. Those fights are where it's manifesting, but really they're seated so deeply beneath the surface.
Yeah, I think also when you really understand the person and know why they're behaving like that, what they're really interested in, why they act certain ways, then there's less of a so-called compromise because you want it for that person, not to give up on yourself, but you want the best for them because you understand where they're coming from, and it's not just battling two people against each other.
Right. And that's where Dr. Gottman found he coded it, the two groups are the masters and the disasters. And he watched couples in this lab and is able to today prospectively be able to predict whether they're going to stay married or get divorced. And that's an unbelievable thing. He can watch a couple have a 3-minute argument, make a prediction, and then follow them down the line. And his accuracy rate is 94%. It's amazing. And that tells us there's actual things you can see, touch, feel, smell, taste. You can actually watch the behaviors. And what I do with couples all the time is now hack the relationship. We know that behavior X that you're doing is going to cause you to become a disaster. Let's shift you over into the master category. And what was really amazing is Dr. Gottman sat with the masters and said, okay, well, everything that you're doing is really contributing to a strong relationship. So who taught you to do that? Who taught you to really listen? Right? To really understand, to be flexible, to have a positive interaction. So he found a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions is a feature of the masterful couples. So that means every time you're going to say something, it doesn't have to be negative, but just something that's not like great, like you left your shoes in the floor. That's negative, right? No one wants to hear that. But he found that those masterful couples were also sprinkling in 5 positives around that. Do you know how hard that is? If you're not in that mindset to say, oh, by the way, thank you for cooking dinner. And I really appreciate that you cleaned up and you look really nice today. And just 5 of those. So imagine if a couple has 10 negatives a day, who has the energy to come up with 50 positives? But that was the ratio he found. And he asked them, how did you know? Who taught you to do that? And the answer that he surprisingly learned was nobody. They just intuitively were part of a demographic of people that had those skills. And now the beauty is we can take those same learned skills and teach them to those where it's not as intuitive.
So are there specific things that if someone has this skills, then they probably have other skills also?
I think that there are certain characteristics when we look at couples. So for instance, the idea of a person being an optimist, being a romantic, all of those are sort of like the low-hanging fruit of somebody who we think is going to say and do the right things, but it's not necessarily true. For instance, I might be the world's greatest optimist and romantic and want to say the nicest things about my spouse, but if I'm still coming to the relationship, let's say with a little bit of trauma, right? A negative past experience that really hurt me, right? That means that when my spouse says something that I find to be difficult, triggering, hurtful, I might run out of the room crying and they're going to be standing there saying, well, what the heck just happened? Right. And then everything's going to unravel and then it's going to fight and then it's going to escalate and then we're going to raise our voices. Things can easily fall apart. And so the fact that I have the mindset of wanting that positive, loving, affectionate, right? That's beautiful, but it's not necessarily going to paint the happy marriage. One of the other features, and there's a number of them that Dr. Gottman found, was that masterful couples were constantly turning toward their partner rather than away. And that means that every interaction that a couple has is what we call a bid. It's a bid for affection, a bid for communication, right? A bid for recognition. I want your attention. I want you to see me, know me, hear me, feel me, know that I matter in your life. So, I might see you sitting on the couch, you're reading a book, and I say, hey, what book you're reading? Now, by the way, no one likes to be interrupted in the middle of reading a good book, right? So it's just the type of thing that like as soon, but I'm bored. I walk into a room, I see you. So I'm like, okay, what book are you reading? Now, imagine the spouse says, oh, it's a book about Winston Churchill during World War II. It's pretty boring. Would you consider that to be a successful interaction? An average observer would say, yikes, this couple's like really like dreadful. But what Dr. Gottman found was that it's actually considered a very positive interaction. I asked you a question. In other words, I made a bid and you caught my bid, right? You responded to it. It doesn't have to be running barefoot in the meadow in slow motion with Disney music playing in the background. Just saying, yeah, it's a boring book about Churchill is considered successful. And it's just showing that I care enough about you to be able to acknowledge that you matter.
Yeah, I'm just completely ignoring and you're not there.
Right. And especially in today's world where everyone's on phones and how difficult that is for, I'm looking down on my phone. And so that it's not just a book. It could be we're sitting talking face to face and I still might be looking down at my phone. And those things, how destructive are they for people who are trying to make bids? And there is a phenomenon that is now called phubbing, which is phone snubbing. Basically, when you're talking to someone, like, when you're calling someone on the phone, you're talking to them and you know that they're just scrolling through their Instagram or Facebook or because they're like, yeah, I'm going to call you back later. You hear their voice, they slow down and drift off and they think that they're just like pulling a fast one. And no one can tell that they're distracted, right? But that impacts a relationship and the relationship thrives on being present, making that eye contact, showing that you care, showing that you matter to me more than this device in my hand, which I'm willing to put away, turn off. I mean, how often people actually turn their phones off, power it off? That's like unheard of,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the relationship needs that.
So how would you suggest someone break the pattern and become more present in their relationship?
I want to encourage people to do this dyadically. In other words, do this as a team. On the one hand, I see relationships as being two halves of the same coin, right? Two different sides of it that when you come together, so if you're going to be emotionally healthier and I'm going to be emotionally healthy, two people come together, great, we've got a healthier relationship. At the end of the day, what matters is just a little more than two really good individuals, one pretty good team. So imagine if instead of me just writing in my journal and meditating about how present I want to be, which is great, and I strongly encourage that, but if it's just my road alone, I'm missing an opportunity. So imagine if I sit down with my wife and I say, I know that I've just been really distant and I know I can do better. I want to work harder on this. Can you join me in this? It would give me a lot of support and strength to be more successful, which is ultimately going to help both of us. So could we both work on this together? And if I slip, could you just kind of give me a gentle, friendly reminder, not a critical reminder, because criticism is poison to a relationship, right? So it's okay to just give me a friendly smile, a wink and say, ahem, right? Whatever the code word is, but let's work on this together. And I think if we could empower a couple to work on the relationship together, that's going to be the foundation to being able to say this is part of our culture in the relationship, is that we grow together. And that goes back to the beginning of the dynamic nature of the relationship. It's always looking to improve.
Yeah, yeah. Also, as one person changes, then the other pull the other one up with them.
Yes. And how frustrating that be is now if I've worked so hard in a certain area and I make progress and now you're slipping or you're not even trying, it's so much more hurtful to me. Like, for instance, if I was on a health kick and I'm exercising and dieting and losing weight and doing great and you're sitting in front of me pounding a box of Dunkin' Donuts, it makes me feel so much more lonely and isolated. And how much more so when the nature of the issue is actually about the relationship. So yeah, let's come together and as a couple work on those items together and enjoy the progress.
Yeah, then you're not going to complain that he's changing because he's changing for the better or he's changing different than you because you're changing together. So you don't have that problem anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Great. Is there anything else you want to share with us?
I will add the following. Everyone knows in life certain basic things. So for instance, if I wanted to lose weight, I can look up all the diet fads and newfangled ways to try to do that. At the end of the day, we all know the answer: diet, exercise. Like it's no secret. And when it comes to working on relationships, there's a million different ways to try to, and self-help and books. And the most important thing is to pick something and constantly work on it, right? So find a book, find a workshop, a seminar, For those that could use the benefit of a couples therapist, go for it. My favorite couples to work with are and I love working with all the couples. Oh my gosh, it's amazing to be able to watch a couple go through a transformation from where they're ready to kill each other. I had one couple that came to me where they had 57 affairs.
Wow.
And we were able to help them rebuild their marriage in a beautiful way, right? I've seen people come back from all sorts of things, but my favorite couple are those who come to me and they're like, our marriage is pretty good. We just want it to be better. So for every single level, whether a couple is doing well, whether they're not. I personally am a big fan of the Gottman material. So for instance, Dr. Gottman's book, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, it's awesome. It summarizes all of the research, but there are workshops and there are seminars and there are books and there are therapists. There's so many great resources to take advantage of just to give the relationship a tweak. I think the most important thing is to be mindful, is to know that I'm not letting us slip, just like in health. I don't want to be on a pattern of slipping. I want to be improving constantly. And if that's something as a couple that we could do together, then ultimately it's going to benefit the relationship in the long run. And if I could be of any help to couples, I would be more than happy to, whether meeting in person, by phone, over video conferencing. And you can just go to my website, asytner.com, ASYTNER, and I'm more than happy to do whatever I can to help all couples.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was great having you on.
My pleasure.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode and subscribe to the podcast. Leave a comment below so I can know what you think. And to book your relationship photo shoot, CJE session, or just to hear more about what we do, go to lifepicksrelationships.as.me. I'm waiting.